John Reed, we just got a report from dispatch. A body was found on the outskirts of the city, died a violent death, and the wounds match our case. That's exactly how the young detective entered my office. Understood, detective. Get the car ready. We're leaving in 15 minutes. My name, as you may have guessed, is John. For 4 years now, I've been the head of the Criminal Investigation Department in our City Police Department. Having risen to the rank of captain, I gained invaluable experience in investigative work, along with the authority fitting my rank. After all, I started out as a regular detective. For all 4 years I've held this position, everything was smooth sailing. Our department was at the top of the clearance rate list, with not a single cold case. But one day, exactly 4 months ago, an incident occurred that still stains our department's record and keeps me up at night. It all began when people started disappearing in our city. This happened mostly at night and always in desolate places. There wasn't a specific victim profile as you'd expect from a serial killer. Among the missing were teenagers, women and senior citizens. And initially, the theory of a serial killer wasn't given much consideration. All suspicions fell on human traffickers or organ dealers who could have initiated the abductions. An active investigation began involving informants, local contacts and the general public, but no one knew or saw anything. It was as if people vanished from our world without leaving a trace. Over the next 2 months, another 11 people disappeared, and the FBI took an interest in the case. I had to submit daily reports on the progress of the investigation, detailing every step we took. A few weeks later, bodies started turning up. We got daily calls from the morgue saying they'd found a body matching the description of one of the missing. By the third body, we identified the killer's signature. Every single victim had been drained of blood, and their pinky fingers had been severed. The skull was surgically cut open, and the part of the brain responsible for vision was removed. The investigation was at a dead end. It was as if our killer was a ghost. Never seen, never leaving a clue or lead, but people kept disappearing with alarming regularity. Arriving at the crime scene, which turned out to be the local landfill, we saw the all-too-familiar scene. The body of a young woman lay in a pile of garbage, missing finger segments and part of her skull, clearly the work of our killer. Questioning witnesses yielded absolutely no results. As usual, no one saw, heard or knew anything. The investigative team began examining the crime scene. Half an hour later, I received an oral report. According to the experts, the woman had been dead for about a day and she wasn't killed there. Nothing new, same as always, but there was one thing that made my heart race. For the first time, our killer slipped up and left evidence. There was a bloody handprint on a fence. Apparently, while climbing over the fence with the body, the killer carelessly left his mark. Without wasting a second, I rushed to the fence. On the old, once green boards, there was a clear handprint, but there was one significant but... The hand was almost 1.5 times larger than mine, and I'm 6 feet 3 inches tall, with hands to match. Leaving the investigative team at the crime scene, I, accompanied by the detective, headed back to the station to report to the higher-ups. By evening, the forensic results were ready. The hand belonged to someone over 7 feet tall, with no fingerprints or sweat residue. It was also noted that no expert dared speculate on the unusual features of our killer's hand. It turns out there's a giant killer operating in the city, but so far we know practically nothing about him. Surely someone that big can't hide so well, I thought, bewildered. Regardless, the investigation had finally moved forward. After submitting a report to the FBI, I began making inquiries to various medical institutions and universities. Maybe our killer studied, or even currently studies at one of them. While I waited for the medic's response, a new directive came from federal headquarters. 3 agents were being sent to assist us, the best of the best. The order stated that these agents had full freedom of action and were granted absolute authority, operating beyond the usual rules and regulations. This outcome surprised me greatly. Honestly, in all my years of service, I'd never seen such freedom of action. Apparently, the case had tremendous importance to the government, given the caliber of people they sent. We were to meet them the next morning, so by 8 a.m., the detective and I were already standing on the station platform waiting for our guests. The train slowly pulled in, and sleepy passengers began exiting one by one. I stood there trying to guess who we were supposed to meet, but as soon as these 3 got off the train, my doubts vanished. I knew it was them. 3 men stepped out of the last car. All of them were tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp, piercing gazes. They each had a military duffel bag and a case that looked suspiciously like a gun case. Approaching us, the 3, introduced as investigators, though they looked more like mercenaries, greeted us and asked to be taken to their temporary residence. Escorting them to their apartment, I then headed back to work. Entering my office, I saw a few documents and a flash drive on the desk. Nervously adjusting my shirt collar, I stepped closer. On the desk were reports on witness interviews and surveillance footage, and one of the cameras had captured our killer. Taking the flash drive, I went to my laptop and started watching the footage. An ordinary evening in the city, people bustling here and there. Their numbers gradually dwindled, and soon cars started appearing less frequently, maybe once every 5 minutes. The city was falling asleep. But then, at the edge of the camera's field of view, a figure appeared in some sort of cloak, almost like a poncho. It was carrying the girl's body, but compared to the corpse, which was 5 feet 7 inches tall, the killer didn't seem like a giant at all. However, the prints on the fence told a different story. Could there be more than one killer? Was it a group? I pondered. The killer moved toward the landfill and disappeared from the camera's view. My thoughts began racing chaotically. Our main theory was falling apart before my eyes. Meanwhile, the figure in the cloak reappeared on the footage, shuffling along. It moved towards the wooded area and soon disappeared into its depths. Calling in my deputy, I instructed him to get a map of the utility lines in that grove. Surely, our killers weren't just working out in the woods. I then began drafting an operation order for their apprehension. Logically, they had nowhere to go. The grove covered an area about 1 mile by half a mile, surrounded on all sides by houses and stores. And since none of the cameras around the perimeter had picked up our target, it meant they were still in the woods. I called the FBI agents and brought them up to speed. As much as I disliked it, those were the orders. On the other end, I was told they'd be there in 20 minutes. The so-called investigators arrived at the same time as the utility report. Imagine my surprise when 3 people in SWAT gear, without insignias, entered my office armed with rifles and gas grenades. When I asked if they were really investigators, they flashed IDs from the FBI's 3rd Special Division. So they sent the elite, I thought. We began studying the utility map together. There was a heating line, a few abandoned drainage tunnels from decades ago, and an underground power distribution hub. Of all the options, the most logical was one of the drainage tunnels. Maintenance crews never went there, meaning anything could be happening inside. Collectively, we decided to inspect all the tunnels for any criminal activity and apprehend anyone we found. No sooner said than done. The strike team, consisting of 5 criminal investigation officers, 3 agents from the Special Division and myself set off for the operation area. Once there, we headed to the first drainage tunnel. Everything seemed normal. The manhole was securely closed, with no signs of tampering, and the amount of dirt and debris on top suggested it hadn't been touched in a long time. The second tunnel was in the same condition, but the third one surprised us. The manhole cover of the third tunnel was chipped and freshly scratched, as if it had been moved recently, and a trail of footprints led to it, clearly visible on the ground. The team readied their weapons, and 2 officers pried open the cover with crowbars, pushing it aside. Before us was an empty drainage tunnel. It seemed much deeper than the others, as the powerful flashlight barely reached the bottom. The officers went in first, followed by the agents, with me bringing up the rear. As soon as the team reached the bottom, a bloody trail caught everyone's attention, leading somewhere deeper into the catacombs. It looked like we were on the right track. Slowly, our group moved down the corridors, following the now dried blood trail. Eventually, we emerged into a large spherical room which seemed to have once housed equipment. Now there was an iron table, heavily stained with a red liquid that looked like blood. Several wires running along the ceiling had been stripped, with branches leading to a hot plate, a refrigerator and a lamp on the table. At the far end of the room, there was another passageway. Without a word, our squad raised their weapons and moved toward the door. As we got closer, we noticed light streaming through the gap beneath the door. The first to act was an officer from my unit. He kicked the door open and burst inside, shouting, "Freeze! Police!" Just 5 seconds later, his scream echoed, a scream filled with terror and pain. Moments later, his body was violently hurled out of the doorway, crashing into the wall. Gunfire erupted, the echo in the confined space nearly deafening us all. Meanwhile, the door flew off its hinges from a powerful blow, knocking one of the officers off his feet and rendering him unconscious. And then it happened. Something I still see in my nightmares. It emerged from the doorway, a creature in a cloak. Why, you ask, do I call it a creature? Because as soon as the automatic gunfire started, and presumably the expanding bullets hit the target, the cloak slipped off, revealing what lay beneath. The thing resembled a large human trying to appear smaller. 2 pairs of arms protruded from somewhere around its waist. One pair disproportionately large, the other bizarrely small, like a child's. Its pale skin was sparsely covered in patches of hair, its eyes the size of saucers and completely black, and its ribcage looked telescopic, folded multiple times. But there was no doubt that if needed, the creature could extend its height significantly. The gunfire merged into a constant barrage, but the thing seemed unaffected by the hail of bullets. It methodically tossed officers aside one by one before turning its attention to the agents. As ashamed as I am to admit it, I fled at that moment. I made it to the surface and immediately called my superiors, reporting the situation as it was. They told me to try to close the manhole and keep the creature trapped until a special cleanup unit arrived. I did manage to close the cover, but how could I hold that thing down there when it had taken out an armed unit with its bare hands? I had no idea. The helicopter with the special unit was about 30 minutes away. Heavy footsteps echoed from below, the ladder creaked, and I knew it was coming for me. I couldn't think of anything better to do than to pile logs and rocks onto the manhole, but it didn't help. The cover flew into the air, landing 15 feet away from me, and it began to emerge. I ran, not knowing what I hoped to achieve. I just ran forward, trying to escape that thing, but damn it, it was faster, much faster. And then I felt 4 hands on my back, pushing me down, crushing me into the ground. Somehow, I managed to slip away and started running again. I ran until I heard the sound of helicopter blades, and then I sprinted toward it with all my strength. An armed squad met me as they disembarked from the helicopter. Together, we moved toward the forest where it was waiting for us. The creature lunged at us from the bushes, but the fire from the squad left it no chance of survival. It seemed they were using special ammunition because the thing was blown to pieces. We all descended back into the tunnel and resumed the search. The refrigerator was filled with jars of blood and pieces of human brain, and on the hot plate was a skillet with roasted finger segments. In horror, I realized this thing was also a gourmet cannibal. After the inspection, I was made to sign a non-disclosure agreement and was escorted away from the investigation perimeter, now handled by the FBI's 3rd Special Division. Even now, after some time has passed, I still recall those days with horror. And in the back of my mind lingers the persistent thought that the mystical and shocking are much closer than we might think. Please write in the comments, support the video with a like, and of course subscribe to the channel. If it's not difficult for you, I will be pleased. You can also share this video with your friends, they will probably also be interested.